Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with 100 other men, your boots sinking into the cold, churned mud of a field that smells faintly of decay and horse dung. The air is thick with the sour tang of sweat and the metallic bite of fear. You're clutching a shield that feels heavier with every passing minute, your knuckles white around the grip of a spear. That's little more than a sharpened stick. Somewhere in the distance, a horn blares, but you can barely hear it over the pounding of your own heart. And the nervous muttering of the man next to you, whose breath reeks of garlic and last night's ale. This is no movie set, no choreographed clash of gleaming knights. This is a medieval battlefield. And it's about as glorious as a pigsty in a rainstorm. Let me take you back to a time when battles weren't fought for honor or glory. At least not for the poor souls on the front lines. They were fought because some lord or king decided his neighbor's land looked a bit too fertile, or because a slighted noble's pride demanded blood. You, the common soldier, didn't get a say in the matter. You were here because you owed service. Or because you were promised a loaf of bread and a chance to survive another winter. Maybe you were just unlucky enough to be born in a village where the local lord needed bodies to throw at his enemies. Either way, here you are, standing in a line that's more a nervous huddle than a formation. Waiting for the signal to move. The signal, when it comes, is a faint, brassy note from a horn player who's smart enough to stay well behind the fighting. Horn players, you see, had a knack for survival. They were the medieval equivalent of the guy who always manages to dodge the worst chores. Kings and commanders loved them, not for their music, but because they were reliable messengers of chaos. A single note from that horn could mean charge, retreat, or good luck, you're on your own. The problem? You're so far from the horn, and the din around you is so loud, men coughing, shields clanking, someone praying under their breath, that you're lucky if you hear anything at all. Half the time, you only know to move because the man next to you starts shuffling forward. And you don't want to be left behind. Now, let's dispel the myth of the heroic charge. In the movies, you see ranks of soldiers sprinting across open fields. Banners waving, swords gleaming in the sun. The reality? You didn't charge. You shuffled. You trudged through mud that sucked at your boots, over roots that seemed to reach up and grab your ankles. Medieval battlefields weren't neat parade grounds. They were farmers' fields, pockmarked with ruts and rocks, slick with dew or blood or worse. In the first 15 seconds of movement, nearly half the front line would trip over their own feet. Over a comrade's shield, over a hidden stump. Nothing says fearsome warrior like sprawling face first into the dirt, your spear flying out of your hands, while the man behind you steps on your back and curses you for slowing him down. And the noise, oh, the noise. Forget the swelling orchestral scores of Hollywood. A medieval battlefield was a cacophony of human desperation. Men shouted, not because they were brave, but because screaming was the only way to drown out the terror clawing at their throats. Studies of combat psychology tell us that about 70% of men in battle make involuntary noises, grunts, yells, whimpers they don't even remember afterward. If you could translate the battle cries of a medieval army, you'd hear less for king and country, and more, please, God, don't let me die, or I should have stayed home. The man next to you might be bellowing something incoherent, his face red, his eyes wild, but you're too busy trying to keep your shield up to care. And his breath? Let's just say medieval dental hygiene wasn't a priority. The smell of garlic, onions, and unwashed teeth was enough to make you wish for a different battle buddy. Your knees are trembling, not just from fear, but from standing in formation for hours. Commanders loved their formations tight, disciplined lines that looked impressive from a distance. But standing still for so long, in heavy, padded armor under a baking sun, left you stiff and aching before the fighting even started. Your gambeson, that quilted jacket meant to cushion blows, was soaking up sweat like a sponge, turning you into a walking sauna. If you were lucky enough to have a helmet, it was probably too big or too small, slipping over your eyes or pinching your temples. And if you were really unlucky, you were wearing chainmail, which weighed as much as a small child and rustled like a sack of coins with every step. Then, the first hit comes. Someone, enemy or ally, it's hard to tell, slams into your shield, and the impact jars your arm so hard you feel it in your teeth. Your ears ring, not from the blow, but from the sheer wall of sound, metal striking metal, wood splintering, men screaming as they fall. Your arm vibrates from blocking that hit. And you're already wondering how you'll manage another. 2 minutes in, you're grand. Plan whatever the commander shouted about glory and victory is gone. Your only goal now is to stay upright. Falling in a medieval battle wasn't just embarrassing, it was a death sentence. The ground was a churning mess of mud, blood, and bodies, and if you went down, the weight of other men trampling over you would crush the life out of you before you could stand. The ground itself became a weapon. Slick with blood and vomit, it turned every step into a gamble. Your boots slid, your balance faltered, and the man behind you wasn't stopping to help. He was too busy trying not to fall himself. The sun, if it was out, beat down mercilessly, cooking you inside your armor. A gambeson might stop a glancing blow, but it also trapped heat like a furnace. You could lose pounds of sweat in minutes. And dehydration was as deadly as any sword. Your world shrank to the few feet around. Youth splintered edge of your shield. The terrified eyes of the man opposite you, the flash of a blade coming too close. In that moment, you and your enemy shared a silent understanding. Whoever called this battle glorious was a liar. This was just the beginning. If you survived the initial clash, the real test awaited. You're still standing, somehow, in the middle of this churning, screaming mass of men. Your shield is splintered, your arm aches from blocking blows. And the air is so thick with dust and blood that every breath feels like swallowing sand. In your hand is a weapon, maybe a spear, maybe an axe. Maybe a sword if you're one of the lucky ones. But these aren't the polished, gleaming props of a movie. They're crude, heavy tools, designed for one purpose: to break through whatever stands between you and your enemy's life. Start with the spear. It's the workhorse of the battlefield. The weapon you'd most likely carry if you were a common soldier. Why? It's cheap. A wooden shaft with a metal point could be churned out by any village blacksmith. Even in kingdoms scraping by on meager resources. It's also simple to use. You didn't need years of training to point a stick at someone and push. Armies loved spears, some equipped up to 70% of their forces with them. The real advantage was reach. With a spear, you could stab an enemy from 6 feet away, while he was still trying to close the distance with his sword or axe. In the tight, shoving mass of a battle, that extra reach could mean everything. But spears had their drawbacks. In the crush of bodies, they were clumsy. Try swinging a 6-foot pole when you're pressed shoulder to shoulder with your comrades. And you're as likely to poke your ally in the back as your enemy. Battlefield records are full of accidental spear injuries, men jabbed by their own side, cursing their friends as much as their foes. And once the lines collided, spears became less useful. You couldn't thrust effectively when your enemy was close enough to smell his breath. Many soldiers dropped their spears in the chaos, reaching for a dagger or just their fists to survive the scrum. Now, let's talk about axes. Not the elegant, double-headed ones you see in fantasy art, but heavy, single-bladed tools that looked like they'd been borrowed from a woodcutter's shed. Battle axes were brutally effective. They didn't require much skill, just swing hard, aim vaguely at your target, and let physics do the rest. An axe could cleave through a wooden shield, dent armor, or shatter bone with one good hit. They were the great equalizer. Perfect for a peasant levy with no training but plenty of desperation. The downside? Axes had a nasty habit of getting stuck. Once the blade bit into a shield or a ribcage, good luck pulling it free in the middle of a fight. Archaeological digs at medieval battle sites often find axe heads embedded in armor or bone. A grim clue that the wielder died trying to yank his weapon out. It was like the medieval version of your phone freezing at the worst possible moment, except instead of a reboot, you got a sword to the gut while you were tugging at your stuck axe. Maces were another favorite, especially as armor improved. By the later Middle Ages, plate armor was becoming common among knights, and slashing swords were useless against it. Enter the mace, a heavy metal ball on a stick, designed to dent armor inward and break bones without cutting through metal. It was simple, terrifying, and required minimal skill. A good swing could crush a helmet, collapse a ribcage, or turn a knight's arm into a bag of splinters. Some religious knights preferred maces because they didn't technically shed blood, skirting church rules against killing. Medieval logic at its finest, crushing someone's skull was fine, as long as you didn't make a mess. Swords, though, get all the glory. In stories, every hero wields a shining blade, cutting through enemies like a hot knife through butter. The reality? Swords were rare. A good sword could cost as much as a house, requiring skilled craftsmen, special steel, and years of training to use effectively. Only nobles, knights, or professional soldiers typically carried them, and they weren't indestructible. Battlefield finds show swords repaired multiple times, their edges nicked, their blades warped from heavy use. A sword snapping in half mid-fight wasn't just embarrassing, it left you holding a very expensive stick. Even when they worked, swords weren't the killing machines of legend. In the tight press of a medieval battle, you couldn't swing a sword properly. Most swordplay was awkward thrusting or hacking, like trying to stab someone in a crowded alley. And the blade itself was rarely the deadliest part. The pommel, that heavy metal knob at the end of the handle, was often used as a makeshift hammer. Sword experts called this the murder stroke, where you'd grip the blade and swing the pommel like a club, smashing it into an enemy's helmet or face. It's probably the most honest name for any fighting move in history. Then there were the improvised weapons, the desperate tools of peasant armies and last-ditch fighters. Farm tools were shockingly common on medieval battlefields. Flails, used for threshing grain, became skull-crushing whips. Pitchforks were sharpened into deadly prongs. Even shovels, honed to a farmer's edge, found their way into the fray. Records from battles like Agincourt show that up to 20% of common soldiers fought with modified farming gear. These weapons weren't elegant, but they were effective, especially when your enemy didn't expect to be killed by a gardening tool. Death by shovel wasn't glorious, it was just final, and a lot more humiliating. The quality of these weapons varied wildly. A king's sword might be a work of art, forged by a master. But a common soldier's spear or axe was often mass-produced, with rusty nails holding the head to the shaft or blades that dulled after one swing. Weapons broke, handles splintered, and metal bent under stress. You might start a battle with a spear, only to end it with a broken stick and a rock you picked up off the ground. Medieval warfare wasn't about craftsmanship, it cared about results. And the results were horrific. These weapons were designed to tear through human bodies, to rend flesh and ruin lives. Armor helped, but not as much as you'd hope. Chain mail could stop a glancing sword slash, but a direct hit from an axe or mace would drive the mail into your flesh, turning your protection into part of the wound. Plate armor was better, but it was heavy, expensive, and still vulnerable to crushing blows. Battlefield surgeons' records show that 40% of armored knights had shattered bones, even when their armor was intact. Armor was like medieval bubble wrap, it might save you once, but after that, it just made crunchy noises as you broke. A hit to the shoulder could tear your arm clean off. These weapons didn't make clean cuts, they shredded, mangled, and pulverized. Most soldiers who lost limbs didn't die from the injury itself, but from blood loss or the infection that followed. The human body holds about 10 pints of blood, and losing just 2 could knock you out. Many bled out in under 5 minutes, sometimes without even realizing they'd been hit, until their vision blurred and their legs gave way. Internal injuries were even worse. A mace might not break the skin, but it could rupture organs, crack ribs, or cause brain bleeding. Medieval doctors had no way to treat these hidden wounds. They called them the "he was fine a minute ago" syndrome, a grim acknowledgement that a man could look unharmed and still be dying inside. Small wounds, like a splinter from a broken shield, or a cut that needed a few stitches, could turn deadly without proper care. Monastery hospitals reported that for every soldier killed in battle, 3 more died later from infections. There were no medics rushing to your side. The closest thing to battlefield medicine was a comrade, tying a belt around your bleeding arm or searing a wound shut with a heated dagger. Pain was a constant companion, with no scale for measurement, just a spectrum from "I can still fight" to "please, end it now." Field hospitals, when they existed, were tents filled with straw and screams, where surgeons wiped their tools on a rag if you were lucky. Amputation was the go-to procedure, not because it was always needed, but because it was fast. Success rates hovered around 30%. and survival often depended on whether the surgeon was sober. These weapons and their wounds weren't just physical. They carved scars into the mind, too. You're still alive, though you're not sure how. Your body is moving, thrusting a spear, raising a shield, dodging a blow, but your mind is somewhere else, slipping in and out of focus like a candle flickering in a storm. The medieval battlefield wasn't just a test of muscle and steel. It was a crucible for the human psyche, a place where fear, rage, and confusion battled for control. After just 10 minutes of fighting, something strange happens. You lose your bearings. Where am I? The question gnaws at you, but there's no answer. The battlefield is a swirl of movement, men shoving, weapons flashing, dust rising in choking clouds. You've spun to face threats from every side. And now you can't tell north from south, or even where your own lines are. Without modern communication, units fractured quickly. Studies of medieval battle accounts suggest 60% of soldiers couldn't identify their direction after the initial clash. Some battles ended with both sides retreating by mistake, each thinking the other had won. It was the deadliest game of you go first in history. Then there's the question that could cost you your life: is that guy with me or against me? In the chaos, recognizing friend from foe was nearly impossible. Armies wore colors or symbols: red crosses, blue lions, but these were soon caked in mud, blood, and dust. In the panic, you might strike an ally by mistake. At the Battle of Toten in 1461, records suggest 1 in 10 casualties came from friendly forces. Men cut down by their own side in the fog of war. Every shadow, every movement, became a split-second decision. Swing or duck, hesitate, and you're dead. Another question haunts you: is this my blood? You're drenched in it, splattered from head to toe. But you can't tell if it's yours, your enemies, or your friends. Blood sprayed from nearby kills, coating you like paint. You'd need a moment to check for wounds. But a moment is a luxury you don't have when someone's trying to bash your skull in. Some men described the surreal feeling of being soaked in blood yet unharmed, while others didn't notice mortal wounds until they collapsed, lightheaded from blood loss. Do I swing now or keep ducking? Your mind can't keep up. The conscious brain wasn't built for this kind of overload. Decisions become automatic, driven by muscle memory. From whatever training you had, your body fights while your mind goes blank. Like driving a familiar road and realizing you don't remember the last 10 minutes. Survivors often couldn't recall specific actions they'd stabbed or swung, but it was as if someone else had done it. Modern studies of extreme stress show that higher cognitive functions shut down in combat, leaving only primal instincts. For medieval soldiers, this meant their carefully drilled tactics dissolved into wild swings at anything that moved. As exhaustion sets in, your vision narrows to a tunnel. You stop seeing people and start seeing shapes: a flash of metal, a blur of color. Something rushing from the left. Friend or foe doesn't matter anymore. If it moves toward you, you strike. Survivors describe this detachment, where enemies stopped looking like humans and became obstacles. Threats to be neutralized. Modern combat psychologists call this battle mind, a state where action outpaces thought. You're not fighting a man. You're fighting a shape, a shadow, a flicker of danger. In this altered state, time warps. Minutes stretch into hours, or hours compress into moments. Some soldiers swore they fought for days, only to learn the battle lasted an afternoon. Others recalled fleeting seconds that witnesses said dragged on for hours. Your body moves on its own, swinging, blocking, stumbling forward, while your thoughts dissolve into white noise. You might feel disconnected, as if watching yourself from a distance. A puppet jerking on strings you can't control. The mental strain wasn't just from the fighting. It was from the sensory overload: the screams, the stench, the constant threat of death. Fear drove some men to freeze, others to lash out wildly. Rage could take over, blinding you to danger until a blade found your side. Confusion was the worst, a fog that made every choice a gamble. You might swing at an ally, run the wrong way, or stand rooted as the battle swept past you. The brain, pushed beyond its limits, played tricks. Shadows became monsters, comrades became enemies, and the world became a nightmare you couldn't wake from. This mental chaos had physical consequences. Disoriented soldiers wandered into enemy lines, too dazed to fight back. Others collapsed from exhaustion. Not wounds, their bodies shutting down under the strain. Some simply stopped moving, staring blankly as the battle raged around them. These weren't cowards, they were men whose minds had hit their breaking point. Medieval chronicles rarely mention this, focusing on heroic deeds. But the silence speaks volumes. The shame of breaking wasn't recorded, but it was real. For those who kept fighting, the toll didn't end when the battle did. You've made it through, though the world around you feels like a dream you can't shake. The screams have faded, replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the soft thud of boots in the mud. You're standing, somehow, though your body feels like it belongs to someone else, itching, trembling, coated in blood that might or might not be yours. The medieval battlefield didn't end with a triumphant cheer or a waving flag. It ended with exhaustion, pain, and the grim work of survival. The first thing you notice is the silence. After hours of deafening chaos, the absence of noise is almost suffocating. Men don't cheer or raise their swords in victory. They collapse where they stand, too. Drained to speak, their faces blank with shock. The battlefield is a wasteland of bodies, broken weapons, and churned earth. You wipe blood from your face, hoping it's not yours, and check for wounds you might not have felt in the heat of the fight. Your hands shake as you pat yourself down, searching for cuts or broken bones. Every bruise, every ache, feels like a betrayal by your own body. Victory, if you can call it that, isn't glorious. It's just being alive when the dust settles. There are no medals, no speeches, just the raw relief of not being dead. Medieval soldiers didn't fight for ideals, they fought to see another sunrise, to get back to their families or their fields. The only prize was continued existence, and even that came with a cost. You look around for your friends, counting who's missing. Some are lying in the mud, their eyes staring at nothing. Others are gone, maybe fled, maybe dead. The math of survival is brutal, and it leaves you hollow. The battlefield becomes a marketplace of sorts, though not one you'd ever want to visit. Survivors scavenge, stripping armor from the dead friend or foe. It doesn't matter. A good breastplate or a pair of boots could mean the difference between life and death in the next fight. You might take a dagger from a corpse, its blade still sharp, or a helmet that fits better than your cracked one. Medieval recycling was practical, not sentimental. Nothing went to waste, especially if it was shiny or had a good edge. You try not to look at the faces of the dead as you pull their gear free. But their eyes follow you anyway. The wounded are everywhere, their moans a low hum beneath the silence. Some can walk, limping toward makeshift tents that pass for field hospitals. Others lie where they fell, waiting for someone to drag them to safety. Or for death to take them quietly. Medical care, if you can call it that, is a gamble. Surgeons work with unsterilized blades, cutting through flesh and bone with the same tools they used on the last patient. Amputation is common, not because it's always needed, but because it's quick and might stop the bleeding. The success rate is abysmal. 25 to 50% of patients die, either from shock, blood loss, or infection. You're as likely to survive the surgeon's knife as the enemy's axe. Infection is the real killer. A small cut, barely worth noticing, could fester and take you days later. Monastery hospitals reported that 3 times as many soldiers died after battle from infections as from their initial injuries. There were no antibiotics, no sterile bandages, just herbs, prayers, and luck. Cautery was common, with heated blades, searing wounds shut, but the screams of men being burned alive lingered in your ears. Pain was a constant companion, with no relief beyond a swig of ale. Or a prayer to Saint Apollonia, the patron of suffering. You drink, because it's the only thing that dulls the ache in your body and the images in your mind. After a battle, men drank for days, not to celebrate, but to forget. Ale and wine flowed like rivers, each cup a desperate attempt to drown the faces of the dead, the screams of the dying, the feel of your blade sinking into flesh. One chronicler wrote that after a major battle, the men drank without pause for 3 days, as if trying to wash away the horror through sheer force of will. These weren't victory parties, they were acts of survival. A way to keep the mind from breaking under the weight of what you'd seen. The physical toll lingers. Bruises bloom where you didn't remember being hit. Your hands tremble, not just from exhaustion, but from the strain of gripping a weapon for hours. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful, interrupted by dreams of the battlefield. You might wake swinging at shadows, your body still fighting enemies long dead. Some men punch the air in their sleep, startling their families or giving their wives accidental bruises. The body remembered what the mind tried to forget, reliving the battle in every twitch and flinch. The mental scars are deeper, though no one had a name for them then. You might freeze at the sound of a hammer on an anvil, your heart racing as if you were back in the fray. A friend's laugh might sound like a scream, sending you scrambling for a weapon that isn't there. You carry the faces of the men you killed, their eyes wide with fear or defiance. You see your comrades who fell, wondering why you lived and they didn't. There was no counseling, no space for admitting weakness. Just the expectation to move on, to fight again when the next Lord called. The battlefield itself doesn't heal. It's left as it was, a grim monument to the day's work. Bodies are rarely buried, unless by monks or villagers who take pity. Most are left to rot, their bones sinking into the mud over years. Broken helmets, shattered swords, and scraps of armor work their way to the surface centuries later. Silent witnesses to the carnage. The field grows over, but it never forgets. Farmers plowing the land might unearth a skull or a rusted blade. A reminder that the earth holds its own memories. Your home now, or what's left of it. The village looks smaller than you remember, the fields less green. The faces of your family unfamiliar, as if you're seeing them through a stranger's eyes. You've survived the battlefield, walked away from the mud and blood. But the war hasn't left you. It clings to your skin, burrows into your dreams, and whispers in the quiet moments when you're alone. This is the final chapter of your story, not a tale of triumph, but of endurance, of carrying scars that no one else can see. You sit by the fire in your home, the same hearth you dreamed of during those endless hours in formation. Your wife moves quietly, setting a bowl of stew before you, but her eyes linger on the way. Your hands tremble as you reach for the spoon. You try to smile, to say something normal, but the words catch in your throat. The stew tastes like ash, not because it's bad, but because every bite reminds you of the hunger you felt on the march. The days when you chewed leather straps to quiet your stomach. You're here, but part of you is still out there. In the churned mud, surrounded by screams. The village expects you to slip back into your old life, plow the fields, mend the fence, laugh with your neighbors at the tavern. But it's not that simple. The plow feels wrong in your hands, too light compared to the weight of a spear. The clatter of a dropped bucket sends you reaching for a sword that isn't there. At the tavern, men clap you on the back, calling you a hero, but their laughter grates. They want stories of glory, of noble knights and daring deeds. You could tell them about the man whose skull you crushed, his eyes wide with terror. Or the friend who drowned in 2 inches of mud, but you don't. You sip your ale and nod, letting their myths fill the silence. Sleep is the worst. In the dark, the battlefield returns. You dream of faces, enemies, comrades, men you couldn't save. You wake gasping, your hands flailing at shadows, your wife's voice soft and worried as she pulls you back. Some nights, you don't sleep at all, sitting by the fire. Instead, staring into the flames as they dance like the chaos you left behind. You're not alone in this. Other survivors carry the same weight. You see it in their eyes at the market. The way they startle at a shout or drink too much to quiet their thoughts. There's no name for what you feel, no healer for the mind. Just the expectation to endure. The physical scars are easier to explain. Your shoulder aches where a mace grazed you, the bone never quite healing right. Your fingers, once nimble enough to mend nets, are stiff from gripping a shield too long. Bruises have faded, but new ones appear, marks from restless nights when you thrash against enemies who exist only in your head. The village healer can bind a wound or brew a tonic for fever. But she has nothing for the way your heart races at the sound of a hammer. Or the way you can't stand to be in a crowd. You drink, like so many others. The tavern is full of men like you, men who survived but don't know how to live. Ale dulls the edges, softens the memories, but it's a temporary fix. You've seen men lose themselves to it. Drinking until they're shadows of who they were, their families left to pick up the pieces. You try to hold back, to sip just enough to sleep. But some nights the cup is your only friend. It listens without judgment, unlike the priest who tells you to pray for peace or the Lord who expects you to fight again when the next war comes. The war never really ends. Not for you. The king may call it a victory, the bards may sing of heroes. But you know the truth. You saw men beg for their mothers as they bled out. You felt the crunch of bone under your blade. The weight of a dying man pulling you down. You heard the silence after the battle, heavier than any scream. These are the things you carry, the things that make the world feel thin. Like a veil that could tear at any moment. Your family tries to understand. Your wife is patient, though you see the worry in her eyes. When you snap at the children for playing too loudly, your son, barely old enough to hold a scythe, looks at you with awe, thinking you're a warrior. You want to tell him there's no glory in it. That war is a thief that takes more than it gives, but you don't. You let him dream, because the truth would break him. And he's too young for that kind of weight. Your daughter, quieter, watches you when she thinks you don't notice. She sees the way you stare at nothing, the way your hands clench. When a cart rattles by, the village moves on, as it must. Crops need planting, roofs need mending, life continues. But you're caught between worlds, the one you left and the one you can't fully return to. You work the fields, but your mind wanders to the battlefield. Replaying moments you can't change. You go to church, but the prayers feel hollow, the words of peace clashing with the blood on your hands. You try to be the man you were. But he's gone, buried somewhere in the mud with the men you fought beside. Some men find a way through. They lean on their families, their faith, or the simple rhythm of daily work. They learn to laugh again, to sleep without dreams, to live with the scars. Others don't. You've seen the men who wander off one night and never return. Men who drink until their hearts stop, men who pick fights they can't win, as if seeking the death they dodged in battle. You wonder which path you'll take, whether you'll find a way to carry the weight, or let it crush you. The battlefield itself is gone, reclaimed by the earth. Grass grows over the blood, hiding the bones and broken blades. Farmers plow the fields, cursing when their blades strike a rusted helmet or a shard of armor. They don't know the stories those relics hold, the lives they ended or saved. To them, it's just metal, a nuisance in the soil. But you know better. You know the cost of every dent, every scratch, every drop of blood that soaked into the ground. History will forget you. The chronicles will speak of kings and knights, of banners and conquests. But not of the common soldier who stood in the mud, who fought not for glory but for survival. Your name won't be written, your deeds won't be sung, but your story matters. It's the story of every man who faced the chaos of war and came out the other side, changed but alive. It's the story of endurance, of finding a way to live when the world has shown you its darkest face. So you sit by the fire, the stew growing cold, your wife's hand resting gently on your shoulder. You take a breath, and then another, each one a small act of defiance against the memories that threaten to pull you under. You're here, in this moment, and that's enough for now. The war may never leave you, but neither will the stubborn spark that kept you alive through the blood and the mud. You carry both, the shadow and the light. And you keep walking, because that's what survivors do. If this journey through the raw, unfiltered reality of a medieval battle moved you, drop a comment below and share your thoughts. What surprised you most about the true face of these wars? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the past, where we strip away the myths and uncover the human stories beneath. Until next time, keep exploring history with us.